Put you in the corner, Tom. Hang on a second. There we are. Okay,
There.
welcome to
I'm,
today's webinar. We've already live, so I see a couple people already in the lobby. Hey, everybody. Tom, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm hanging in there. It's Friday.
It's Friday.
I'm currently renovating.
Christmas is coming.
Yeah, I'm currently renovating my garage. So I also am like looking at like the chore list I have to get done this weekend for construction. So that's where my head's going at 3 o'clock on a Friday. I need to go stain.
Yeah,
Sure.
I was impressed with the photos.
That was
You made a lot of progress.
that was V1. I got some more stuff done since then. It's good. Couch came in, man. The couch came in. It's coming along.
Oh wow! Okay.
I know. I'm excited. Also got a bourbon smoker kit. That was nice. I got one of those, and I don't know if you ever tried that. I'm a bourbon and scotch guy, and that was pretty awesome.
What kind of bourbon?
So right now I'm not drinking good stuff, like the good stuff you would think of, but I got a bottle of what is it? The salted caramel Crown Royal. Like they make these very limited runs of this stuff. Like every
Oh
year,
wow!
like
Okay.
Christmas Crown Royal, Christmas Canadian whiskey, and it is the smoothest non-mixed drink you will ever have in your entire life. Like it is delicious. I know people who won't drink hard liquor and love that stuff. So I'm like rationing it because I can't buy anymore. It's gone, sold out everywhere. But it's good.
If do you like after dinner
Yeah.
drinks?
I do a lot of like I have friends and family over every once in a while, like once every couple of weeks, something like that. That's usually when I have a drink. That's that. The other night was more of the exception than the rule. It was more of a hey, I've got this cool lounge. I want to try it out.
I'll make a suggestion.
All right, what's up?
Irish Mist.
Try that.
Irish Mist it's actually one of the national drinks of Ireland.
Nice.
And it's made from Irish whiskey, honey, and various spices. It's an after dinner drink. You can drink it straight or on the rocks.
I'll give that a try.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
I'll give that a try. Okay. Well, thank you for joining. Let's go ahead and dive in. I think we've given enough time for people to come in. I see people already hopping in the lobby over on LinkedIn. Welcome. Title today's webinar, Mitigating Risks, Maximizing Rewards, Cybersecurity Strategies for Insurance Companies, or insurance professionals, I should say. So, Tom, we've talked a lot about cybersecurity risk, right? How relevant is this topic to the industry as a whole for insurance?
It's priority one, and largely because cybersecurity has always been an issue, but it's something that agents have been traditionally thinking, well, I could put it off. I'll put it off until next year. It's not top priority. I have other issues, but artificial intelligence and the introduction of ChatGPT has changed it all.
Yeah.
Now it must be priority one, and to deal with it and to understand what an agency's weaknesses are before they move ahead.
I mean, carriers are having that conversation right now when it comes to the downstream agencies.
Yes.
Like, how do we mitigate the risk they pose? I know several carriers. I've actually had a conversation with the CISO of a carrier, and that was one of his chief concerns is, okay, this carrier, or these downstream agents, how do we mitigate this risk? Because we're giving them access to all of our stuff. And that was a conversation that we had about, I don't know, 8 months ago. So it's definitely happening right now in real time. And I am a big proponent of being proactive on these kind of things. You never want someone to force you to do something and be caught in the back and sort of the downstream effect of, oh gosh, now I got to do everything at once because I'm being mandated to do it. I don't know if you've worked on that side, but it's not fun when you wait to the very last second and a huge onerous requirement is thrown at you and you've got 30 days to comply. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that nobody wants to be involved in. A proactive approach is always, I think, better in terms of realistic risk management, right? Getting yourself in a position where you can adapt quickly.
And an agency's relationships with its carriers will improve as a result of you taking concrete action now. They're gonna like you to do that.
Yeah, I definitely won't hurt you, especially in light of some stuff we're going to be talking today. So let's back up and introduce ourselves real quick. We kind of just dived into whiskey and then risk, right? I'm Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. We are a cybersecurity provider for the SMB, SME with a focus on the insurance industry itself. Tom?
I am Tom Wetzel, founding of my own firm, Thomas H. Wetzel and Associates. We are a digital marketing consultant to the insurance agent, primarily with specialties in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence.
So today, the topic, as we mentioned, is how are we going to manage this risk, right? Like, how do we make it so that A, the risk itself is manageable, but also B, put ourselves in a position to maximize the potential for that risk management to turn it into a reward, right? Like that's the whole point of today's webinar. Well, first, let's just address the elephant in the room we already kind of brought up. Technology innovation, they're revolutionizing the way businesses operate. They're offering unprecedented opportunities for growth, scale, and efficiency. What you can do now as a small business compared to what you could do 10 years ago as a small business with technology as your vehicle, it is like going on light speed in the world of business. But with most opportunities, technology innovation does have inherent risks. When you run your business on this technology platforms, there are inherent risks that need to be managed. Today, we're going to be talking about risk management and a quick primer. Obviously, this is basic bones to anybody who's in the space, but just to kind of define what we're going to be speaking about today, we're going to focus our topic on 5 basic methods of risk management and how that relates to cyber: avoidance, retention, transferring, loss, reduction, and sharing. Sorry, I had to click the right thing. And then before we go to the next part, I want to define cybersecurity risk with you, Tom. So for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to focus this definition. Cybersecurity risk, what is it? Cybersecurity risk refers to the potential for unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of information in a business. It can also entail financial losses, damage to an organization's reputation, and the legal repercussions it is influenced by. Legal repercussions. I misread that. It is influenced by a firm's use of technology, the nature of its business operations, and the strategies in place to safeguard against a range of vulnerabilities and threats. And we'll give a couple examples here. What can examples of cybersecurity risks look like inside of an insurance company? Just throw some generics out here. Phishing attacks. You mentioned generative AI. Phishing attacks we've all gotten a phishing email at this point. If you haven't, I really want to know how. Like, I got 3 today alone. So we've all gotten phished. That's when someone pretends to tricks you someone tricks you with an email, pretending to be somebody else into giving sensitive information like passwords, pretending to be someone that you trust. Generative AI, we'll talk about that later, definitely has a really negative impact that's played on this particular risk. You can have large troves of data that's legally sensitive, such as personally identifiable information. That's addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, of course, the big ones, Social Security, credit cards. I mean, the list goes on and on. A lot of people don't realize how much of that stuff they have just sitting in the downloads folder of their computer until someone takes a look at it. You might have strict requirements, compliance requirements that are not being strictly adhered to. If you're in New York, NYDFS, not a fun place to be sometimes, but it is absolutely relevant. Ransomware, I think we've all heard this one at this point. Again, one of those things where I don't know how you live in 2023 and haven't heard the term ransomware. It's a type of malware that locks the data until you pay ransom, whether it's in the cloud or on your computer. And of course, cybersecurity risk can be as simple as outdated software. That program that you've had in your computer since you bought it, you installed your Adobe, you installed, that video player, you installed some kind of web browser. If it's not updated regularly, criminals have figured out how to break that thing and use it to get full access to the machine remotely. That's a cybersecurity risk. All these things constitute cybersecurity risks. Close the slide deck for a second. So, Tom, obviously, we have different perspectives when it comes to cybersecurity risk. Myself as a practitioner in the field and working with the broader business community, yourself with working in the independent agency brokerage field and speaking that language. What are some of the biggest things you've seen agencies struggle with in this kind of risk field? Like when we talk about cybersecurity, it's like other than reputational stuff, like what specifics can you get into?
Well, the two things you referenced, insurance companies' concerns about data security.
Yes.
Agents will say, well, my carriers are doing a good job of protecting their own data. And to a large extent, that's true. What they are most concerned about, and they have any agency who has seen their agency agreement revised to address cybersecurity will tell you this. They are also concerned about the degree to which insurance agents are not addressing their own cybersecurity issues. Agents legally are collectors of data.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they pass along that data to an insurance company. But as a collector of data, legally, an agent is responsible for that data no matter where it ends up. So if it's not protected by the agency, or it's not protected by, you know, some another vendor that the insurance agency is using, they're going to be on the hook. And you mentioned the last point in your previous slide talked about outdated software.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we see in the cybersecurity risk assessment, cyber risk assessment that we do for agents, is we identify the weaknesses of vendors. That includes agency management systems and raters and all of that. And one of the issues that we come up with fairly frequently is the issue of outdated software. The vendor software is outdated. They haven't updated it. And in some cases, some of their older models, which either have not been updated or the agency has not updated, purchased the latest version of that, that leaves an agency far more vulnerable than they should be.
Yeah. I think the problem with this risk is a lot of people, when they think of cybersecurity risk, they think like that scene from the movie Hackers, when they think of like it's this one guy in a back room with sunglasses and a trench coat, and he's trying to hack the world, and why on earth would they ever bother with me, right? Like that's sort of like a native bias I think a lot of people have, and
Right.
I get it. That's also a great movie, by the way. But that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about cybersecurity risk. We're talking about exploitation, criminal intent. We're talking about a lot of illicit financial gain, and the fact that this data that agents pass is very valuable, even if they're only hanging on to a small fraction of it somehow. What I kind of envision when I talk about data transference, right? Like we're just passing the data through to the carriers, for example, the analogy you gave me. My daughter has one of those little rubbery, sticky hands. You know what I'm talking about? They come in a little black bag. You can throw it at the wall. It stretches out and it sticks to stuff, right? And what inevitably happens, yeah, it lets go of whatever you stick it to, right? It's just you can move the paper, move the toy, whatever she grabs over, but it always hangs on to a little bit of residue. It always kind of gets a little dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And by the time she's done with it for a few days, it's just covered in the stuff, right? Like it's basically useless. I think data transference is a lot of the same thing. Even if you're just acting as a simple conduit, unless you're incredibly diligent about it, you inevitably always hang on to a little bit of that data. And that data accumulates. Next thing you know, you've got a verified treasure trove of all kinds of stuff just sitting in the downloads folder of your computer or hovering in your cloud account. Like you never know.
Yeah, and we know from experience, Logan, that the results that we get from the cyber risk assessments that we work together on identify all those old passwords or credit card information that
How many times have we
all of a sudden it's just like somebody dropped it on the floor in effect.
I love these assessments, not because we're trying to be mean about it, but how often has it been like we go up to someone in these assessments, say, is this the login to the carrier's portal? Yeah. Okay, you were responsible for that login. Why is it just that easy to get off your computer, right? Like what's going on there? Because you understand in the terms and conditions and the agency agreements that you sign all these services, not just your carriers, but even like your cloud accounts of Microsoft and Google, you are responsible for your level of access to whatever platform they're giving to you. And that's the extent of how this relationship goes. If data is lost, if data is stolen, that legal obligation is governed by that contract for the most part. And it falls almost always squarely on you.
Correct.
Let's move on to the next slide on my slide deck here. That's actually a great segue. Cloud manages the risks. A lot of people seem to have this misconception, Tom, from my perspective, that because the platform that they're using to manage their data is in the cloud, somebody else is taking care of all the security, right?
That's a very common comment that I get from agents.
Yeah, and I get it, right? Like the marketing on this stuff makes it seem like just come pay us our subscription fee. We'll take care of everything. Like that does seem a lot of the time. But what you have to understand is not really the answer to this question is not really. They will maintain their security in terms of if someone tries to hack the company directly, like hack into their servers, hack into their employees, the carrier's employees, like that's their obligation. But as far as security for you and what we're talking about with the most commonly used vectors, we have something in the chat. Hang on a second. Let me take a look. Oh, sorry. That was just a little notification from the streaming platform. So as far as when it comes to you, like that obligation of maintaining your own cybersecurity and any kind of ramifications, they waive all responsibility from that. Like for the most part, they say you are responsible. Your username, your password, your credentials, whatever it might be, is like a user badge. If you lose that user badge or use it inappropriately or get tricked into giving it up, that's not our problem. That's yours. And that's how they take that position, and that's not true. I shouldn't say it that way because it is their problem, but on a bigger macro scale, right? That's why they're trying to push responsibility downstream. So 82% of these attacks are happening in the cloud. We talk about all this stuff we hear in the news. This isn't the cloud. The cloud at the end of the day is just somebody else's computer. Like you've rented somebody else's computer for a set fee of every month or whatever your subscription looks like, and they handle the infrastructure, they handle the the compute power, but a lot of the other stuff that you think they would be handling, not so much. Sorry, I'm waiting for the slide deck. Okay. So these stats are always fascinating. I'm going to stop after the slide, Tom. We can chat a little more because I want to hear your take on this. So the FBI IC3 is like a public resource where people can submit reports of cyber attacks and cyber incidents as the industry as a whole, right? Like as across the United States. And I went through the 2022 FBI IC3 report. I pulled out three key things I thought that was super fascinating because I think the most of the people on here would assume number two, but 1 and 3 are the ones that are kind of eye raisers. So number one, business email compromise, BEC, was a significant threat in 2022. It received over almost 22,000 complaints, 21,832, totaling to more than 2.7 billion with a B in adjusted losses. Business email compromises have evolved and become more sophisticated. 2, ransomware. It's another threat. We can't ignore it. We keep hearing about it. We keep thinking maybe it'll get better. It doesn't. The IC3 received over 2,385 ransomware complaints in 2022 alone, and SaaS ransomware particularly. I want to talk about that for a second. Software as a service ransomware is growing. Just because you put your stuff on the cloud does not mean ransomware can not impact you. It doesn't work that way. Give you a great example of this. If you use Google, this past week, Google had a bit of a boo-boo. Tom, did you read about Google's boo-boo?
Yes, I did.
Google had I'm on a bunch of technical forums. I've heard about that in the wee hours of the morning. Google accidentally deleted 6 months worth of data out of the cloud accounts of a significant chunk of its users and had no plans or announcements of any kind of timeline when they were going to get it back. It's just kind of gone.
Yeah.
And guess what? And the terms and conditions, you agreed to that. Like they don't back up your stuff. So that data, ransomware and SaaS is absolutely a problem because that data is not backed up the way most people think it is for the most part. Cloud, and last one is kind of interesting. It's an old school method, but it's absolutely valid. Call center fraud cost victims over $1 billion in 2022 alone. There are primarily 2 types of call center frauds identified: tech/customer support and government impersonation. Those are the tried and true methods if you're going down the road of I want to trick someone to give them something over the phone. And for those of you who are thinking, oh man, nobody's going to fall for that. The MGM ransomware incident that happened earlier this year with one of the country's largest casinos, they lost $100 million because of that whole thing altogether, according to their quarterly filings. That allegedly started because of a 10-minute phone call made to their tech support department. Someone with a 10-minute phone call managed to worm their way into a multi-billion-dollar casino and cause $100 million in damages.
And our agent, those agencies that are on this call, Logan, will look at the call center fraud and they'll say, but that doesn't affect me. And to a large extent, they're correct. However, and this is a big however, it does affect their policyholders, the clients that depend on them, the agent, to guide them to protect data.
Yeah.
through a cyber liability policy.
What are you going to do?
Uh,
Because,
what are you going to do? And there is the risk transfer by buying an insurance policy against this is a very flawed solution.
yes.
And the reason is, yes, it will cover you to a certain extent. But in order to even get coverage today, you're going to have to demonstrate to the insurance company that you've taken certain specific, significant cybersecurity actions.
Yes.
And even if an agency doesn't sell cyber, or cyber is a small part of its book, they still have a responsibility as a advisor to help that policyholder understand their cybersecurity risks
I
and
would
to
say
take
too.
the necessary actions.
I would also say to maintain the integrity of their business as well, because you
Yes.
talked about business email compromise. Fine, call center, maybe it's not as valid threat, but you have an email, right? Agencies have emails. What happens when someone gets into
Oh,
your email
absolutely.
and starts emailing your customers pretending to be you and causes real damages to your customers? Who's now
And we have
holding the
seen,
bag? Yeah.
yeah, we've seen plenty of examples of agents who have been victimized by that because one of their policyholders opened something they shouldn't have, and it ended up, having to pay an insurance policy
Yeah.
premium twice.
This happens all the time in construction firms.
Yeah.
If you want to turn to the industry and see how this happens with construction firms, they do pretty large installments on a regular basis when they do projects. Like, here, this is the milestone, pay me this installment, so forth. And what I've seen happen more than once is, on a construction firm, someone will get into the firm's email the customer and say, "Hey, the payment changed. You don't pay here, you pay here," and they cost their customer 75, 100, $200,000, and that customer's out of that money. So the construction company's not getting paid, and the customer now has reason, legally or otherwise, to hold a grudge against the construction company. That is absolutely true with the agencies. If damages come from
Right.
you, the way our liability system is set up in this country, the buck kind of stops from where the problem originated from. You're part of this, whether you like it or not, and it's a reputational thing as well,
Right.
which, when it comes to damages, cyber definitely has a financial component. We're going to talk about that as we get into this presentation, Tom, a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely does. But the reputational stuff, the soft costs, there are some things that money cannot immediately fix that have a real tangible impact on the quality of an agency's business, a brokerage's business, like things that you just can't spend money to make it go away once it happens. Let's go ahead and go on, because we're coming up with a little clock on time. So, Tom, I think you've heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it for anybody who hasn't heard it. I've had to deal with a lot of stories very similar to this, so I put together a general composite using generative AI of all the details of all these stories, and so I can tell to the person listening on this call, how could this possibly happen to me? Give them an example, right? And I love storytelling, so let's go ahead and dive in. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Techville, I love the generative AI's creativity. It's so great. Lived a diligent employee named Sarah. Sarah worked for a small, reputable financial firm and was known for her meticulous attention to detail. Sorry, small, reputable insurance firm. I misread the next step. One day, she was sipping on her morning coffee and going through her emails when she received a message that appeared from her boss, Mr. Thompson. The email was perfectly crafted, mirroring Mr. Thompson's usual tone and writing style. It read, "Sarah, I need you to review this financial report urgently. There seems to be a discrepancy in our accounts receivable. Please check the attached document and get back to me ASAP." The email had an attachment named financial_report.pdf. Sarah, being the diligent employee that she was, immediately clicked on the attachment, eager to resolve the issue. However, unbeknownst to her, she had just fallen victim to a sophisticated spear phishing attack powered by generative AI. The email was not from Mr. Thompson, but from a cyber criminal who had used generative AI to mimic Mr. Thompson's writing style. The AI had been trained on numerous emails and documents that were posted on the dark web to create a convincing forgery. The attachment was not a financial report, but a malicious software that now had access to Sarah's computer. We're going to stop here to take questions. Anyone's got anything in the chat for us? Because this we're at a good halfway point. Whether you are an organization of 1 or 100, you are an active target for cyber criminals. Would you agree with that statement, Tom?
Absolutely. No one is immune. And unlike an agent, thinks about the threats of a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake. Those are geographic specific. Cyber knows no boundary, no season. They happen to everybody. And we've had agents, very small rural agencies, who've been hit by cyber attacks and barely survived. And they will be the first to tell you they wouldn't wish a cyber attack on their worst enemy.
We're going to talk about insurance in a second. And obviously, that's a very thorny subject with our audience. So we're going to be very careful in how we frame this and talk about this. But I would say that's absolutely the case. I think a lot of people would ask the question, and naturally, why on earth would a cyber criminal go after me? It's a small business. I think that's a lot of the questions that people would have. And the answer is they don't. They are not discriminate in who they target. They take a shotgun spray and pray attitude towards this kind of opportunity. They are taking the metaphorical internet shotgun, pointing into general vicinities of the internet and pulling the trigger over and over and over until they get a bite, until they hit something. And the problem is they're doing it so frequently, everybody's going to get hit sooner or later.
And artificial intelligence changed the landscape completely because it enables a cyber criminal, as you know, to not send out a dozen attacks. They're sending out hundreds of attacks or thousands of attacks, and they are learning and getting better.
Yeah, I mean, I use AI on a regular basis. It summarizes a lot of my Zoom meetings for me. AI is amazing at taking massive amounts of data and parsing it down to very short, easy to act upon information. I use a platform for my Zoom calls, and you know what that thing does? I'll take an hour-long Zoom call on this call, right? I'll be on a call like a important customer. We're talking, we're shooting the breeze, going all over the place. Then the call, I go to the AI and say, AI, what are the key takeaways from this call? And the AI will go, here's the 3 things you need to care about most. And it's right 95% of the time. I just took an hour's worth of information, condensed it into 2 seconds of my time. Boom, boom, boom. There are absolutely criminals using AI to make themselves more efficient, to make their processes more broader in scope, and to handle more and more data and work so they can increase the footprint of their operations.
But by the same token, Logan, and we've talked about this, you're using artificial intelligence, but you are securing it first.
Yeah.
And you're not just sending your information into the cloud.
Correct.
Some agents are doing.
And there's a responsible ethic, and honestly, so I had 3 questions going. I messaged every attendee and said, "Hey, what questions do you have?" And that was one of the ones: is how does generative AI play into this conversation? So let's stop here for a second and talk about that. There is an ethical, I believe, responsible way to use generative AI in a business where you manage your data, and then that field's still rapidly evolving. There's many thought leaders. I think I even saw one on here who joined the attendees, a thought leader in my sphere of like how to handle AI responsibly. They exist. The problem is it's still in its infancy. Not a lot of people understand how to use it properly, and the amount of data they're feeding these tools, while it might not seem that damaging, that data never goes away. It can absolutely be abused, and if the AI is improperly accessed or improperly used, there are real wounds. Like you can actually wound somebody with that data it harnesses in there, and next thing you know, you're in a world of pain. A lot of people are just saying, I just want this thing to answer my question real quick with generative AI, right? Like I want large language model to type an email for me, or they want it to do this for me, a marketing material. But you're copying and pasting things into ChatGPT, for example, if you're on the public free version, that once you put that in there and you click send to ChatGPT, that data doesn't belong solely to you anymore. There's a separate copy just floating out there in the ether now for who knows what. So let's dive into cyber insurance real quick, because I think a lot of people, we've talked about risk management, right? I think we've addressed the problem of avoidance. It's nigh impossible to avoid this thing. It's not going to happen. Sharing, I think we've addressed that as well when it comes to the carriers and the online platforms using in the cloud. Both have their pitfalls with it. Sharing is problematic, to say the least. if not nigh impossible, in my opinion, for this risk. So we're going to dive into transference now. It's not the insurance itself, which I'm sure a lot of people care about. So first off, if you do have cyber insurance, good on you. Seriously, I think every modern professional service company, whether you're insurance, whether you're financials, whatever, needs to have these kind of policies. I do. I am a firm believer in it. That being said, it is a really difficult problem for the carriers to grasp. I'm going to put a disclaimer out here. I am not a licensed insurance agent. Either is Tom. This is just our perspective dealing with the industry, and mine specifically dealing with cybersecurity and having to handle the claim side of things on the cybersecurity side. The applications have gotten way more onerous, and I think, Tom, you would agree with that. Let's start there.
Yes.
They like you mentioned before, they're asking you.
You know, if anybody.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, some of the proposals are, you know, they used to be, you know, a few questions. I don't even understand the terminology.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too. I've seen an insurance policy is a contractual agreement between you and the carrier, and the carrier does want to honor the policy, generally speaking, right? Like this is not me demonizing the carriers. This is not at all. Like they do want this. That being said, the risk is at the end of the day, they need to make money. So they need to control the risk they absorb versus the risk they pay out on, and it's a really challenging thing. So they started asking basic questions like, hey, are you doing what's considered basic risk management in this area so we don't absorb an undue amount of risk? And the problem is it was such a quick movement to where the basic risk management standard was, comparatively speaking. It just threw everyone for a loop. Like, what the heck is this? What is penetration testing? What is vulnerability management? What is, and managed detection and response? All these things these questionnaires ask. What do you mean 3-2-1 backup schemas, right? Like, what is this stuff? And so what we've seen, and obviously it's been outliers so far, but there have definitely been cases where gross negligence does apply because of the standard that the carriers are using, saying, look, this is the basic minimum, and you grossly lied on the application because you didn't know what you were checking. Like that is like the fact that, and they've won in court on that in a couple cases. Like gross negligence is a factor here, but let's say you're not being grossly negligent, right? You have to go in there understanding the financial exclusions that are in your policy. That's another one I've seen a lot of people fall into the pitfall with. Say you go out and get $1 million in coverage. Great. The aggregate's $1 million. Have you read the supplement section of the policy? I really hope you have, because that supplement policy for financial fraud, for example, if someone takes money from you, if you're lucky, is capped at $200,000. And in the case of a CPA firm whose policy I read recently, it was $1 million aggregate, $250,000 in financial fraud coverage, which they're CPA. So I'm thinking risk. What's the most likely thing someone tries to hack you for? Money. And then to trigger that protection of the policy was a $20,000 deductible. So after someone takes money from you, you have to pay $20,000 to trigger your $250,000 in coverage, which traditionally, in my experience, takes at least bare minimum. I've never heard of it happening more than a few weeks. In worst case scenario, I was Googling statistics the other day. It's somewhere between 2 to 4 months to see any kind of claim payment, because forensics has to happen. The carrier needs to figure out who did what, how did it happen. A breach coach needs to be consulted. That's a lawyer that can advise on the legalities. Does there need to be a disclosure? Does the government need to be informed? Like, these are all things that take time. So that being said, cyber insurance is tricky, I'd say, to say the least. It's tricky, and it's not as comprehensive as a lot of people think it is when it comes to the damages. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of supplements, so you have to read the fine print. And again, one thing that agents don't, I've had agents tell me, just the sheer paperwork that they have to deal with, even if they have relatively decent coverage for a breach, just the time it takes to navigate all the paperwork that they have is a real hit on their productivity within the agency.
Yeah.
They could be spending their time selling when they're having to write out forms and talking to adjusters and forensic specialists and all the rest.
Yeah. I am never going to tell someone not to get cyber insurance ever. Like, I think it's a necessary.
No, it's an absolute necessity.
It absolutely is. But it's sort of the conversation we're having right now, if we want to equate it to a more traditional market, I think is it's an analogy of I have car insurance, therefore I don't need to wear my seatbelt, right? Like one does not equal the other when it comes to cybersecurity mitigation. There are still things that you need to do that maybe a policy will not cover. We talked about reputational loss already. We talked about emotional loss, like going through that. I would, like you said, Tom, and I agree 100% what you just said earlier. I wouldn't wish a breach on my worst enemy. It is one of the most emotionally draining things you have to go through. It's constant paperwork, it's constant fighting, it's constant hit in your stomach. What was actually taken? Because you sometimes don't know how bad it is for months. So you're constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop. And on top of that, your business is not operating at full capacity because you are diverting essential resources, as you put, even on, like as much as you divert on the proactive side, you're diverting even more on the reactive side. Someone's got to talk with the breach coach. Someone's got to work with the forensics firm. Someone's got to call the customers, right? Like it's a bit of a nightmare, in my opinion.
And the smaller agents are under operating. Many of them are operating under the assumption that they are exempt.
Oh yeah, we should probably talk on that. Yep.
Perfectly data security. One thing they are not exempt from, no matter how small they are, even if they're one person, is they have a legal responsibility to contact their policyholder in the event of a breach.
Yep.
And they have to specify the breach happened, when it happened,
what was taken,
and what are they doing to fix it. And all of that has to be done. It varies from state to state, but it's usually between 30 and 60 days.
Yeah, I'm in Ohio, and so every state in the union has a law on the books that says if you lose personally identifiable information, which is basically any kind of personal information on a person, their phone number, their email, their address, whatever, you have to tell them, and you get a deadline to tell them. And there is no small business exception. So in Ohio, it's 60 days. You get 60 days to inform someone, and I believe Ohio reserves the right after day 61 onward for every day of inaction to fine you $1,000 a day.
Yeah, that's very typical across the country.
And that,
so
I know a business like 20 people working for it that had that thrown at them. So like they went bankrupt, but it was absolutely used too. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, I think we're making the point, Logan.
Yeah.
That they need to take cybersecurity seriously.
Well, let's talk about the security challenge, right? Like what's driving all of this? Well, let's start with this is the challenges that practitioners on the cybersecurity side face. Half of companies, when they get breach of ransomware, lose between 11 to 20% of their client base. Let's start there. A 20% reduction of a client base is an absolutely devastating blow for a small business. If I lost 20% of my client base, Tom, I don't know if I'm going to be around to. I know some people would probably lose their job, and that would break my heart, and I would have real challenges. Like that's not an insignificant blow. 92.4% of attacks are delivered via email on average. And this number, I think we've chatted about this. This number is probably conservative. It definitely fluxes. I've seen anywhere from 120 to 207 days. But on average, I'm going to use the conservative number for today's presentation. It takes about 4 months to figure out somebody took your stuff. So if it's not something like a ransomware or a financial breach of some sort where you would know pretty quickly it happened, you might not even know something's up for 4 months until after it happens. It's that much harder to go back in when you call, if you have to trigger your insurance policy to get forensics out there to figure out what happened 4 months ago. Like how much stuff has changed in 4 months. It's crazy. This next slide, I'm going to read it because our screens are covering it up. 58% of malware attack victims are small businesses. More than 1 in 2 cyber attacks are directed towards the small business as opposed to the large business. It kind of makes sense why. Small business is the backbone of the American economy, as politicians are so famous for saying. They're 50% of our economy. They have scope, and unlike the bigger businesses, unlike the carriers like we're talking about, the agents have no way invested the same amount of resources in the cybersecurity as the carriers have. Criminals know this. They're not dumb.
And yeah, they know that agents are an easier mark.
Yep.
And they are going to go toward the path of least resistance.
Yep. And the last one's the one that I think is most devastating. 60% of small and medium-sized businesses go under within 6 months of a breach because of all the things we just talked about. It's costly. It's emotionally draining. There's a reputational hit. If you can survive long term from a data breach, you'll probably recover okay. Like the statistics you show that out, like a couple years later, you'll probably be fine. The problem is small businesses can't run on a 25% reduction of revenue for 2 or 3 years. They don't have the cash and reserves like a big company does. We talk a lot about bigger companies that have been breached and nobody talks about it anymore. Equifax is a great example of this. Equifax lost 1 in 2 American social security numbers. I was one of them. Mine lost them. No one talks about Equifax anymore. Why? Because they had enough cash on hand to just absorb the ride for the year of trouble they had, and they moved on. A small business, they don't have that kind of cash reserve, not particularly, especially not an independent agency. So 60% go under within 6 months. How do you respond to these cybersecurity threats? I mean, this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but you need to understand what we're getting at here is hackers treat this as a 9 to 5 job. Like it's not the. I hope we've illustrated this well, but it's not the criminals in a hoodie kind of a thing, right? Like they're not sitting in a corner in a dark room for the most part. It's a guy in a collared shirt sitting in an office cubicle, working his 9 to 6, whatever, treating this like a Monday through Friday job and trying to make money for the quote unquote company, right? Like that's how they view this. They operate in countries with very little extradition, often, such as Russia, which does not have an extradition treaty with the United States, targeting U.S. businesses. And because of this, because it's so profitable and so lucrative, the security landscape changed dramatically even in the last year. And that's before we talk about, as you mentioned multiple times, Tom, the advent of generative AI really taking up the mainstream media, mainstream eye. That also has added a whole layer of complexity. We're going to go ahead and pause here for 30 seconds and just shoot the breeze for a second, Tom, because I want to let people have a chance to have a chat. I do know that while we're waiting for people to put things in the chat, a question that was asked is CMMC, selling policies to people in compliance spheres. So I want to take a minute to address that. Absolutely do I recommend that you should be the trusted risk advisor in that scenario. Many government agencies right now, including the Department of Defense, are realizing that they have to force downstream vendors and partners to comply with cybersecurity basic risk management, whether or not they have insurance. CMMC is a great example. CMMC is a ruling that basically tells if you have customers that work as a subcontractor to a subcontractor to a subcontractor of the DoD, for example, that chain of businesses that does, subcontract work outside the Department of Defense. Well, there are cybersecurity requirements you have to carry. And CMMC 2.0 just unveiled last year. It's a huge lift. Insurance is part of that. If you are caught in a breach in CMMC, this one kind of stinks. You're caught in a breach. Your upstream vendor, so say you're 5 degrees removed from the DoD as a subcontractor, right? The one that's 4 degrees removed from you is supposed to cut your contract. There is language in their contracts that say, for like a customer, right? You must cut that contract. They are being negligent, cut it, or the fifth power of the DoD got hacked, and the fourth power is supposed to cut their contract. What happens if the fourth power doesn't cut their contract? But then the fourth power's contract is in jeopardy with the third powers, because then they're supposed to cut the contract. So if they don't do it, they jeopardize their own business. Insurance, it's a bit of a quagmire on that. I would say advising customers, if you're going to be a risk advisor on that, and I know I'm a little bit biased because I run a firm that does this, so take this as you will, but engaging a compliancy specialist for if a customer knows they need to be compliant with CMMC and they're reaching out to you as the risk advisor to get an insurance policy, that's a great first step. But there's absolutely more they need to do, and reaching out to a qualified compliancy firm and having them engage that, and even setting up maybe a warm relationship with a compliancy firm, so that when those opportunities come up, you have a warm introduction ready to go. That's a really good thing for you to have, and it'll help enhance your value to your end customer. They're going to trust you as that advisor because you introduce them to someone quality who can handle their problem. That'd be my recommendation. Tom, anything to add there?
No, I think you've covered it. The bottom line is that cyber security is a moving target. Cyber crime is a moving target. It's complicated, and you can't put it off. You have to address it. That doesn't mean you have to solve everything today, but you've got to start today.
Yes.
To understand what your risks are and what you can do time-wise and budget-wise to fix the weaknesses that you have, and you have to understand what those weaknesses are. You can't live in a dream world. One thing I make clear to agents is they are not an island. We all operate within this digital ecosystem in which the weaknesses of one can spill over to somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say too, as a lot of these insurance, third parties, agencies, brokerages, resellers, like they're moving to this trusted advisor status, right? Like that's the big crawling hall. Like we don't want to just be the guy that sells the policy. We want to be that trusted partner to the businesses, that trusted risk.
Correct.
Being knowledgeable about this threat, even if it's not the kind of policy that you sell, can absolutely lift you in the eyes of your customers as that trusted risk advisor.
Absolutely.
We called it mitigating risk, maximizing rewards. If you're looking for the reward, let's start there. You are now the expert on risk management in a brand new area by engaging this kind of issue. And as the expert, as the risk advisor, you can go to your customers, your clients, and say, hey, don't know if you're aware of this or not, but especially ones in like compliancy fields we talked about already. Anyone who's regulated, so that's FTC safeguards, CMMC, the new SEC rulings, like the list goes on and on. There's about, I think last time I checked, about 80 something regulations that apply to cybersecurity throughout the country, not counting state laws. So you got opportunity. You can go to those people and say, hey, I noticed that you're doing this kind of stuff. Have you considered this? And they'll go, oh gosh, I haven't. And if you don't sell the policy, now look what you just did. You became that trusted risk advisor that gave them the heads up to say, you know what, I should look into that. Thank you for bringing this to my attention.
On the flip side, if you don't bring it up and something happens to that client's going to come back to you and say, why didn't you bring this up with me?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me about this? What else are you missing?
And it's going to happen. Like this next slide's perfect timing. Is it time to manage your risk? Yeah, it's going to happen. Progressive, this is just the last few months. Progressive was hit by a data breach from a third party that caused it, by the way. They haven't said agent yet. They just said third party, but we don't. It walks and talks like a duck, is all I'm saying. But they've had a breach of 347,000 customers over. American United Life Insurance Company confirmed data breach leaked by consumer social security numbers. Over a 40,000 person data security breach by the Move It breach earlier this summer. You'll notice that on the list I have shown in the slide deck, at least 3, if not, I think 4 of the 10 companies listed were insurance companies. This is all stuff that's happening just in the last 6 months. And you go Google last 6 months cyber attack, and you will have about not enough time in your life to read all those stories. It's just a depressing rabbit hole. So I would argue, and I hope we're making that point, it is time to manage your risk, because we're going to take a look at this here real quick. Cyber risk checks. We talked about the risk strategies, the 5 basic principles in the beginning of the slide deck. An old hat to most of the risk advisors already watching this live stream. But can we avoid it? No. I think the answer to that is a resounding no. I can be very clear about that. We can't avoid this risk. It's going to happen at some point. We share it. The answer is not, practically speaking, at least not most of the time. SaaS platforms and carriers alike, all such as Microsoft and Google, specifically waive liability involving risk for individual account access. It's in the terms and conditions which govern the entire relationship, or in the agency agreement, as you brought up earlier. They have firmly pinned the risk on the end user of their products. Can we transfer it? It depends, right? Like that, I think that's the best answer we can say to that one. It depends. And the chances are not fully. There's always going to be stuff that a cyber insurance policy cannot cover, like we talked about before: reputational damages, emotional damages, disruption to the business and lost revenue potentially from that. The list goes on and on. And if you can get cyber insurance, and like we said, we do recommend that you do so, Tom. I think that was a resounding yes from both of us. You need to embrace the fact that, unfortunately, the premiums have gone up drastically. They seem to have stabilized in the last year a little bit, based on all accounts I've heard. But I know I paid for $1 million policy in 2019. I think the premium was like $1,400, maybe even less than that. I got the same policy in 2022, and it was 4x the cost minimum. And I actually got a pretty good deal, I was told. The applications require the insured to attest, often too, that they maintain specific cyber risk mitigation measures on that application, that warranty. We talked about that. And the policies themselves do have potential pitfalls that we run into all the time, specifically in the form of exclusions or supplements that are far beneath the aggregate amount. What does that leave us with? Okay, so we can't avoid it, can't really share it, not practically speaking. Transference is problematic, to say the least, though you should still try. What does that leave us with? Well, That means we can either retain the risk or we can reduce the risk. That's our real practical options on the table. I hope for anyone who might watch this that we have made a good argument that retaining the risk is not really a valid option. I think we've made a good point on that. Don't you think, Tom?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
So let's talk about reducing. I think we're left with reducing risk. What do we do to reduce this risk? Well, first we need to know what risk we're reducing. We talked generics about cybersecurity, but as you saw in the beginning of our slide deck here, it's a whole lot of stuff, right? Like cyber risk is a very wide realm. You need data. You need to know how this risk specifically relates to you before you can make any kind of actions to mitigate it. Every business is unique. Every agency is unique. You need to understand how this impacts you directly, I think, in order for you to make any kind of meaningful risk mitigation measures. And you need to identify your current risk exposure. Once you understand how it impacts you, you need to figure out how vulnerable you are to the risks that are unique to yourself. And we're going to pause there for a second, because what we're going to recommend is, for any business, insurance or otherwise, a cybersecurity risk assessment. Tom, let's before I go into the professional slide decky, it's not really professional, it's just a slide, but you got it. I was being ironic. Let's talk about the cybersecurity assessment here for a second, right? Like that's a really big fancy term. What does that look like to the average agency?
It starts with a conversation with me. We talk about their experience, what actions they have taken, or the ones that they are aware that they've taken over the last couple of years. And then we take a look at we scan both the agency and the vendors that they use, agency management system, to really understand what their weaknesses are. We also take a look at the user agreements that the agency has signed with those vendors that grant permission to share, sell, rent personal, identifiable, and marketing data to unnamed third parties, because the terms of service are written to the vendor's advantage, not to the agency's advantage. And that you need to be aware of the extent to which those user agreements are represents an existential threat to the agency. Then it's one thing to know, and we work with you to do an internal scan so we really understand what's on individual computers within the agency. But then the question becomes, what do we do with all this information? And that's when we lay out specific, step by step, here's what you need to do. And then you make the decision how to get it done.
Yes.
For an agency, they may want to use somebody outside. That's fine. Or they may want to use us.
Yeah. I mean, the goal of a cybersecurity risk assessment, as much as it is a great opportunity to talk about options, is just to empower the agency to make a good decision.
Correct.
Like the goal of anyone, and there's multiple kinds of people who do these kind of assessments, but the goal of anyone who's a valid practitioner of this kind of form of assessment, they're going to present the data in a way that's digestible to the agency. That's a big one. Not going to throw technical jargon. I think we're pretty good at that, Tom. We don't throw a bunch of technical junk at the agency and say, figure this out, right? No, this is a conversation meant so they can understand it. And then from there, they can take that data in a way that they can understand. And we do for us, Tom, as let the audience know. Let's show them our process real quick, Tom. I actually have a handy little infographic right here. So our process, it looks exactly like what you described, an executive sponsor meeting. We're sitting down with the agency's principal and saying, hey, or the brokerage or whoever, right? And saying, hey, tell us about you. Tell us what makes you unique. Tell us about what kind of risks you have. Let us look at your security policies, the agreements that you have in place, the vendors that you have in place. Do you have an office? Do you have anything physical in the office we need to be aware of? Is there a server? Is there something that you're using outside the agency software that we need to do some stuff with? Do you have a network? And by network, that means both actual routers and switches in your office, but also means the cloud environment that you're using. Are you using Microsoft 365? Are you using Google? How's the data being managed in there? Is there anything in there you need to be aware of? Maybe you weren't aware of. One of the ones that we like to look for is, those OneDrive and Google Drive links where you can just share with somebody the file. A lot of people will share instead of doing the proper way where they add the email address in and say, I just want to share to this one person. They'll share it and it gives you that link you can copy and paste into an email. Well, a lot of people don't realize that that link's available to anybody on the internet that finds it. We hear about bots all day long. Bots are a thing. They look for links. We want to make sure you know it's open. If it's inappropriate, close it. We look at the data. We look at anything that makes you unique on your business practices that you want to protect, intellectual property. We look at your people, both in their systems they use and as the very end of this, their behavior. We do test them. We do try to figure out what they're doing and if there's anything that you need to be aware of and how they act. Because at the end of the day, people will be people. People are a double-edged sword. They're the people who will take your business to its greatest heights. But also, if they decide, whether by ignorance or willfulness, to have bad behavior, they can absolutely cut you deeper than anybody else can. And then, of course, dark web research. We look at the dark web. We look at, hey, is there anything on the dark web that's already out there that even before someone even knows who you are, like by hacking, they could just pull up and use against you? That is in a nutshell our assessment process, and we're not being secretive about it. Like, it's a pretty well thought out process, and we're showing if anybody wants to see what it looks like. At the end of this process, Tom, you and I, we sit down, we talk to the principal, usually with a nice presentation, have a conversation, and one way or another, they make a good decision at the end of it, right? Like, I don't think we've had a single presentation where it was like, oh gosh, this was useless to me. I can't do anything with it. We've never had that response from anybody.
Well, the assessment that we developed was developed in consultation with agents so that we were giving information that was usable for them and they could understand. And you're right. I've never had an agent say, why did I do this? They're almost all of them say, why didn't I do this 6 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, knowledge is power. And I think the problem is so ubiquitous. I don't ever believe in burying your head in the sand, but especially in the case of cyber risk, burying your head in your sand has real consequences if you just ignore it.
Exactly.
It's going to swipe at you, and you're not going to like it. So today we have a special offer. So first and foremost, let's talk about our special offer. So we already mentioned this part. This was the findings and recommendations where we sit down and talk to you about, what we think you need to do. Our special offer is 2 for. So first and foremost, it's everywhere on the screen right now, so you shouldn't have a problem scanning the QR code. I'm going to go ahead and minimize for a second. We are offering a free 15-minute consultation with Tom or myself for anyone who just wants to chat about this. Maybe you don't understand what's going into this. It's a no obligations talk. We just want to make sure you are pointing in the right direction. If you'd like to talk with someone about anything particular that's bugging you in the cybersphere, or just you want questions that you have answered, a great question, like I mentioned before, some of the regulatory stuff, how do I advise customers of regulations? Yeah, we'll happily do that. The other thing I would recommend, and this is also a special offer, maybe you're not ready to sit down with us. Okay, fine. We don't bite. Like, I really hope you're okay with sitting down with us. But if you're not there yet, you're like, I need to learn more. I don't really understand this. We got you. I have another QR code. It's coming up at the bottom of the screen. Second. So right there, a box has just popped up. Says download a free ebook for cybersecurity essentials. What is this ebook? This ebook is a 40-page book on the basics of how to build a cybersecurity practice for your business. It's based on NIST, which is a universally acceptable standard of cybersecurity practices for the National Institute of Standardized Technology. And it is a free, no obligations book. It is our gift to the community. If you are the kind of person that wants to learn more before you do anything, I completely respect that. And I know, Tom, you do as well. We want to give you the tools to do so. So I would recommend scanning this QR code or going to cyber.tabernacle.tech/protect my business. Again, that's cyber.tabernacle.tech/protect my business. It's a pretty good read, I think, but I know I'm biased. I kind of wrote it. So, Tom, before we part ways today at the group, and we're at time, any parting thoughts that you have for anyone in the industry, whether they're agencies, brokerages, professional servicing in the agency? What is the big takeaway you think they should walk away with today on what we're talking about?
Don't wait. We understand cybersecurity is a very complicated, seemingly impenetrable subject, but it's not.
It really is.
I've been in the business for almost 40 years, And my goal is to make sure that agencies stay protected.
Yeah.
Whatever I can do to help you do that, whether you use us or somebody else, is immaterial to us. We just want you to be protected and to take the steps you need to take. Don't put it off. Give us a call. We'll happy to answer any questions you have, walk you through the process, get you comfortable, and empower you to make the right decisions.
Last thought I'm going to leave on with that too. That sounds amazing, Tom. And I couldn't agree more with what you just said. But also, this is a competitive advantage, guys. You want to be, I'm not trying to put too much pressure on this, but when you're properly secured and prepared for this, you are in the position that when your competitors fail to take action, you're going to be the one taking those. We talked about that. Their customers won't want to work with someone sometimes when that happens, and it's going to come out. By
And
putting
we
yourself in that position, you are now in the position of, look at me. I looks like I know what I'm doing. I'm the trusted advisor.
and we know from talking to agents that policyholders are thinking about data breaches. They may not ask you directly, but they're thinking about it. It's up to you as an agent to say, you need to understand this. We've got your back. You know, we
Yeah,
can help you in this area.
absolutely. Well, once more, I'm Logan Edmonds, Tabernacle Technology Solutions CEO. Tom,
Tom Wetzel, Thomas H. Wetzel Associates.
hope you guys have a great. Oh, sorry. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Have fun. Take a look at the ebook. Take a look at talking with us. But otherwise, stay safe out there. And honestly, a little paranoia on this subject, no matter what, going forward, is probably not a
Yes.
bad thing. So be a little paranoid. I know that's a weird exit call. Be a little paranoid.